As the snow falls outside, we gather by the fire, celebrating the warmth and magic of this Christmas morning.
My family had grown so large over the past decade that hosting Christmas in someone's living room was no longer realistic. This year, we rented a community lodge just outside town, a big wooden hall normally used for weddings, bingo nights, and the occasional charity dinner. It was warm inside, filled with the smell of cinnamon candles, plastic evergreens, and the loud overlapping chatter of relatives who only see each other twice a year. Kids darted between tables, adults clinked glasses, and for once, everyone seemed to be in a genuinely cheerful mood. After dinner, we gathered near the giant Christmas tree at the front of the room to exchange gifts. My Uncle Mark, who had volunteered to dress up as Santa for the kids, began handing out presents with exaggerated ho-ho-hos and theatrical gestures. Everyone was laughing until he paused on an unfamiliar box. It was wrapped in dark green paper so deep in color it almost looked black. There was no name tag, no marking, no handwriting, just a box that none of us remembered bringing. At first, nobody thought much of it. Probably someone forgot, my aunt said. But after we handed out every gift and nobody claimed responsibility, a small group of us, mostly adults, gathered around the mysterious present out of sheer curiosity. My cousin Ryan volunteered to open it. The moment he tore the wrapping, the festive mood in the hall shifted, almost imperceptibly, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. Beneath the paper was a green cardboard box, sealed with dark red tape. It didn't look festive, it looked wrong somehow. Old, faded, out of place. Ryan peeled the tape away and lifted the lid. Inside was a single object, a small wooden carving, no bigger than a hand. It was shaped like a figure, maybe a person, maybe something else. The wood was dark, nearly black, with strange grooves carved across its surface. Not symbols exactly, but patterns that made my eyes feel strained the longer I looked. Ryan's 8-year-old daughter leaned closer. "What is it?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. And that's when everything changed. Before anyone could answer her, a strange heaviness washed over me like a wave of pressure inside my skull pressing outward. The lights seemed to dim, even though they didn't actually change. The laughter stopped. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. One by one, people went silent. Then, we all turned. Not toward Ryan, not toward the carving, but toward the western wall of the hall. It was completely automatic. I didn't decide to turn. My body simply moved on its own. I felt my neck twist, my eyes lock onto the blank wooden wall, and my limbs stiffen like I was suddenly made of stone. Yet my mind stayed alert. I was fully conscious, just unable to move anything except my eyes. Around me, at least 40 family members stood frozen the same way, facing that same wall, like puppets whose strings had all been yanked simultaneously. Even my grandmother, who had barely walked on her own in years, stood perfectly upright without assistance. I tried to speak, to shout, to breathe harder, to move even a finger, but nothing responded. On the edge of my vision, something shifted. A person, a man. He wasn't there a moment earlier, but now he stood near the Christmas tree, a tall figure in a black suit and a dark hat. His presence was so profoundly wrong that my brain seemed to twist around the memory every time I tried to focus on his face. I couldn't make out a single detail. It was like looking into fog. He stepped toward one of my cousins, leaned close, and whispered something in her ear. The moment his lips moved, her body snapped literally and she dropped to the floor, crawling in a jerky, unnatural pattern that made every hair on my body stand upright. Her arms bent the wrong way, joints cracking, as she scuttled across the floor like an insect. He moved on. Another whisper. Another horrifying reaction. My uncle began clawing at the wall, scraping so hard that skin peeled from his fingertips. He didn't make a sound, not even a grunt, just continued scratching until streaks of red smeared across the wood. A teenage cousin bit into her own arm, tearing flesh with horrifying determination. Blood dripped onto the floor in steady, quiet taps. Meanwhile, the children, those too young to be affected, were screaming, tugging at their parents, shaking them, trying desperately to pull them out of the trance. Their cries sounded distant, muffled, like I was hearing them through a thick wall. Then the man stepped to the center of the hall. He spoke. I couldn't understand the words. They didn't sound like language at all, just low, vibrating sounds that made the lights flicker and the wood in the walls creak. Yet somehow those meaningless sounds carried intention, command, authority. Our mouths opened in perfect synchrony. And without wanting to, without even understanding why, we spoke back in a single, cold, unified chorus. To you we bow. We are nothing. You are all. M. The words felt like they came from somewhere deep inside my chest, not my throat. The man spoke again, louder, sharper. You control us. This we see. I am no more. There is no me. My vision blurred around the edges. My body felt like it was being peeled apart from the inside, like something was reaching into me and pulling. Not my soul, not exactly something more primal, something I didn't know I had. We began to speak again. Thank you, Father, for this night. You give us all. Please take my... Something crashed. Loud, sharp, violent. The trance shattered like glass. And suddenly, the screaming returned. The lights brightened. People collapsed. Blood, panic, children sobbing, adults gasping, crying, shouting for help. But the wooden carving, the object that started all of it, was gone. So was the wrapping, the box, the tape, everything. It had simply vanished. For a few seconds, everything in the hall existed as pure, paralyzing chaos. People stumbled, clutching their heads. Aunts cried for their children. Kids clung to their parents' legs, begging them not to look at the wall again. My uncle dropped to his knees, staring in horror at the bloody smears he had left behind. And my cousin, her arms distorted and trembling, was screaming in pain now that whatever had numbed her body had evaporated. I stood motionless, not because I was frozen anymore, but because shock had emptied my mind of anything resembling thought. My heart was hammering so loudly I could hear it echo in my ears. I tried to replay the events, to understand what exactly had broken the trance. But the only clear image was the small wooden carving hitting the floor and making that ear-splitting, impossible sound. Except the carving didn't exist anymore. Not on the floor. Not near Ryan. Not anywhere. The object that had just caused 40 people to behave like puppets, controlled by an unseen hand, had evaporated from reality, like a bad dream fleeing the morning light. What happened? Ryan gasped, leaning heavily on a chair, his daughter gripping his legs so tightly her knuckles turned white. I don't know, I managed. Where's the carving? Ryan stared at me, confusion overtaking panic. What carving? The one from the box, I insisted. The wooden figurine you pulled out. He blinked rapidly. It wasn't a figurine. It was a music box. The thing Mason broke. My stomach twisted. A music box? No. It was carved wood, dark, with patterns. Before I could finish, our cousin Leah, who had been standing with us earlier, jerked upright. You're both wrong. There were dried flowers in the box. My mom grabbed them. They turned to dust when Mason hit the floor. Ryan shook his head vigorously. No flowers. There was a music box. I opened it. That's not what happened, I snapped, louder than I meant to. You opened a carved. But before any of us could argue further, Ryan's daughter tugged on his hand and whispered, Dad, what about the man? The room fell silent. The adults looked at each other uneasily, but none of us answered. The kids had seen him too, that shadowy, impossible man in black whose face none of us could remember. Yet the adults' memories fractured the moment we tried to recall specifics. That was the moment I knew. Whatever had happened wasn't finished with us. The lodge staff called an ambulance for the injured, and the police arrived shortly afterward. I stood outside under the dim yellow glow of the parking lot lights, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me. When the officers questioned me, I told them what I could without sounding insane. A mysterious box, a strange object inside, everyone freezing, everyone harmed. But when they asked how it happened, who caused it, what exactly we saw, my mouth went dry and my mind blanked. The details slipped away like water through my fingers, leaving only impressions, shadows, and a cold fear I couldn't articulate. That night, we all went home shaken and exhausted. I didn't expect to sleep, yet somehow I did. And at 3-4 a.m., I woke with a jolt, gasping as though someone had plunged me into ice-cold water. My dream hadn't been a dream. I had been back in the lodge, standing in that same stiff, unnatural position, facing that same western wall. But this time, the man was beside me. Close. Too close. I still couldn't see his face, but I felt his presence like a hand pressing against the center of my chest. He leaned down and whispered into my ear. The sound wasn't a real language, more like vibrating tones that resonated inside my skull. Except when I woke up, I somehow understood their meaning. The message wasn't words. It was certainty. A truth forced into my mind with surgical precision. There was more. More boxes. More objects. More gatherings. More families. More chances for whatever he was to reach others. And then came the line that made my blood freeze. You were spared only because you were interrupted. I sat up in bed, trembling uncontrollably. Outside my window, the street was silent, peaceful, normal. Yet I felt watched, as though the darkness beyond the glass hid something waiting for me to make the wrong move. Something that didn't need light or form to exist. I remembered the last thing we said before the trance broke. Please take what? Take me. The next morning I called Ryan. He hadn't slept either. Neither had Leah. And every one of us had dreamed of the man whispering something incomprehensible into our ears. 3 different dreams. 3 different whispers. But they all ended the same way. There are more. Now, every time I walk into my living room and see the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling innocently, I feel a weight settle on my spine. A dread that coils around my ribs like a tightening rope. Because the message wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. A promise that he wasn't finished. A promise that the next box could be anywhere. Under any tree. In any home. Already waiting. So listen to me carefully. If you ever see a present you don't remember wrapping. If you ever find a gift under your tree that doesn't belong to you. If you ever feel tempted to open it, just to look. Don't. Destroy it. Throw it away. Burn it. Bury it. But do not, ever, open it. Some gifts aren't meant to be received. And some things, once invited in, never leave. I was 31 when this happened, and I was working as an overnight supervisor at a regional sorting and shipping facility, the kind of place that goes into overdrive in December. Think massive warehouses, endless conveyor belts, and a deafening rhythmic clatter that makes you feel like you're inside a giant machine. The Christmas rush meant 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week, running on coffee, and the grim determination to get all those Amazon and FedEx boxes to their destinations. The hours were 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. This particular year, the week before Christmas, we were short-staffed. My team was usually a tight-knit crew of 6 guys and 1 other supervisor, but we had 3 people call out sick with the flu, so management hired a few temporary workers. One of them was a guy named Cal. Cal was quiet, almost unnervingly so. He was maybe mid-20s, tall, and carried a kind of dead-eyed exhaustion that was different from the usual holiday fatigue. His uniform was always too clean, his movements too precise. He never joked, never complained, and never took a break longer than the mandated 15 minutes. He was a perfect worker, which, in the chaos of a shipping yard, made him stand out like a statue in a mosh pit. He was assigned to the outbound bay, which was my sector. It's where the boxes are loaded onto the trucks. A long, enclosed loading dock with dozens of doors. Cal's job was simple. Stack boxes from the conveyor onto a waiting pallet, wrap it, and wait for the forklift. My other supervisor, Sarah, the overreactor of our small group, noticed him first. She cornered me during a coffee break one night. "Have you looked at the stuff Cal is sorting?" she asked, her voice low and conspiratorial over the roar of the machinery. I shrugged, tired. Probably all the same crap. Electronics, socks, ugly Christmas sweaters. "No. Not the boxes he's supposed to be sorting," she insisted. "The boxes he looks at. He spends too much time with the problem boxes." Problem boxes were the ones that had been flagged by the scanner damaged, poorly labeled, or suspicious. They went into a holding cage for manual inspection and relabeling. Cal had no business dealing with them, but I had noticed him loitering near the cage on a couple of occasions, his back to me, fiddling with something. I'd assumed he was just reading labels out of boredom. "He's just curious," I said, ever the calm thinker, trying to rationalize his strange behavior. "New guy. It's an interesting place." Sarah shook her head. "It's more than curiosity. He's looking at the addresses." I saw him hold up a small, beat-up package, the kind people send to their grandkids, and he was just staring at the address for almost a minute, not the label or the damage. He looked like he was memorizing it. I dismissed it, telling her to focus on the backlog, but the next night, I kept an eye on Cal. It was 3 a.m. The facility was quieter then, the lull before the final morning rush. Cal was at his pallet, stacking boxes neatly. I watched him casually as I walked by. He picked up a medium-sized box, the kind that might hold a nice set of headphones or a small kitchen appliance, and paused. He didn't check the label for damage. He didn't adjust the way it sat on the pallet. He simply turned the box, not to me, but toward the wall, his whole body obscuring the label for a moment. His movements were swift and subtle, practiced. When he placed it down, it was with an almost tender care that was completely out of place in our rough, fast-paced environment. As I walked past him, I caught the slightest, fastest flicker of his eyes. They darted toward me, and immediately away. A tiny spike of adrenaline running through my own body. He knew he was being watched. The next morning, before the end of my shift, I made a point of going over the problem box manifest from the night before. I was looking for a pattern. I found nothing, just a normal assortment of smudged barcodes and crushed corners. However, a detail in our security log caught my attention. Every night, we had a full inventory scan. The log showed that a small, unmarked side door near the outbound bay, an old one we never used, had been briefly opened and closed at 3:17 a.m. It was barely a blip. Could have been a temperature fluctuation causing the latch to pop. Could have been a draft. But I remembered Cal, standing there at 3 a.m., carefully, tenderly placing a box down, turning it from the light, and Sarah's words. He's looking at the addresses. A cold knot started forming in my stomach. The Christmas rush wasn't just about delivering gifts. It was about delivering the most intimate details of people's lives. Their names, their children's names, the exact coordinates of their home, and the value of what was inside. In this dark, cavernous building, we were holding a city's worth of personal information in our hands. And Cal had access to it all. I went to the on-site security office and checked the camera footage for 3:17 a.m. The camera covered the outbound bay. The side door was visible in the distance. At 3:15, Cal was at his pallet, working, his head down. At 3:16, he walked off camera toward the end of the long loading dock, supposedly going to get a pallet wrap dispenser. At 3:17, the side door, barely visible at the edge of the frame, silently cracked open a sliver, just enough for a hand to slip out and immediately pull it shut. The motion detector for the door was old, and the opening was so small and quick that the alarm hadn't even finished cycling its pre-detection routine. The whole thing took less than 2 seconds. Cal reappeared a few seconds later, walking back with the dispenser, completely composed. I looked closer at the footage of the 2-second gap. The camera was grainy, but as the door opened, there was a flash of something white or pale slipping through the gap. Too quick to identify. It looked like a piece of paper. My blood ran cold. He wasn't stealing packages. He was stealing information, addresses. Or maybe he was leaving a message. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't accuse a temporary worker of industrial espionage, or whatever this was, based on a gut feeling and a 2-second door opening. He was a model employee. I told Sarah to keep an eye on him, to be the skeptic's eyes, and I started a new, secret manifest of my own. I would track the problem boxes he handled. The next night, I found my pattern, and it was far more terrifying than I could have imagined. The next 2 nights were a tightrope walk. I was perpetually exhausted, fueled by the unsettling suspicion that I was the only person who saw the danger. Sarah, the overreactor, was now a true believer. We communicated in hushed, fragmented sentences near the high-decibel rumble of the sorting belts. "He did it again," she whispered, her eyes wide. 5 of them tonight, different sizes. Same thing. He turned them away from me, held them close, and then placed them down gently. "Did you see the addresses?" I asked. "No, that's what's so weird. He's too fast. But listen, the labels were all smudged or torn, like they'd been manhandled," she said. The crucial information was in the problem box cage. I waited until 5 a.m., when Cal and the rest of the night crew were on their final break, and went into the cage with a flashlight and my own security pen. I didn't care about the boxes he was handling on the main conveyor. I cared about the ones he had selected, and the only way he could select them was if he found them, or if he created them. The moment I looked at the damage on the packages that had gone through Cal's area, I knew. The packages weren't just damaged. The damage was precise and repetitive. It was always a slight tear on the barcode label, a tear that would be missed by a cursory glance, but was just enough to fail the automated scanner. Every single one of them had a similar, clean, deliberate, incidental tear. It meant that Cal was creating his own problem boxes by subtly tearing the labels of the packages he was interested in. Now the question was, which packages? I pulled the full manifest for the last 3 nights and compared the addresses on the boxes that had the intentional label damage. It was a small sample, maybe 15 addresses in total, but the pattern was chillingly specific. They were all houses in small, affluent, and relatively isolated cul-de-sacs or estates. That made sense. He was choosing targets of opportunity. But the truly terrifying link was the names. Every single address had a package labeled for a woman in her late 20s or early 30s. The packages were almost always small to medium, suggesting personal gifts like jewelry, perfume, or high-end clothing. Gifts from a partner, a mother, or a friend. The horror wasn't in the robbery, it was in the targeting. Cal wasn't just looking for places to break in. He was isolating women who had a specific profile, learning their names, their addresses, and what gifts they were receiving for Christmas. He wasn't a thief, he was a stalker. He was a predator, using the anonymity of the shipping system to find his prey, right down to the intimate detail of what their loved ones bought them. I felt a wave of nausea. I was in charge of a predator, and I had inadvertently given him the keys to the city. I went straight to my boss, a man named Mr. Davies, the calm thinker-skeptic of management. I laid out the evidence. The 2-second door opening, the suspicious addresses, the pattern of deliberate label damage, and the fact that he was only selecting women in their early 30s. Mr. Davies listened politely. "Listen," he said, folding his hands on his desk. "We are in the middle of a national shipping crisis. We cannot fire a man based on a gut feeling and a few torn labels. You're stressed, it's Christmas, and you're seeing ghosts. It's probably a drug mule marking packages for pickup, nothing more." He was rational, detached, and utterly blind to the psychological terror of the situation. "Watch him closely. If you see him actually stealing, you call me. Until then, you need to focus on the backlog." I felt the panic rise. I couldn't wait for him to steal. I felt a desperate need to warn those women, to get them to change their locks or at least be on guard. But I couldn't. I didn't even have their phone numbers, just their names and street addresses. And if I called the police, what would I tell them? A man who works for me is memorizing the names of women from the addresses on their packages. I'd be laughed out of the station. I went back to the floor, my anxiety a crushing weight. Cal was back at his post, stacking boxes with that same unnerving, silent precision. His eyes met mine across the conveyor belt, and for the first time, I saw something in them other than exhaustion. It was a faint, almost imperceptible spark of knowing. He knew I was onto him, and he knew I was powerless to stop him. The next night, Christmas Eve, was the last shift for the temps. It was a skeleton crew, just the essential supervisors and the main staff. Cal was there. My last night with him. The tension was suffocating. I kept him in constant view, making excuses to walk past his station, watching his hands. But he was impeccable. He handled hundreds of boxes, and his movement was flawless. He didn't turn a single one. He didn't tear a single label. He had sensed the heat. He was laying low. At 7 a.m., the end of his shift, Cal clocked out. I watched him walk through the employee exit, his dark duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I felt a surge of relief so strong my knees almost buckled. He was gone. But the relief was fleeting. He had collected his information. Now, he was free to act. My shift wasn't over until 8 a.m., but I was already making a plan. I was going to violate every company policy. I was going to write down every single address I had logged and, come 8:01 a.m., I was going to call the non-emergency line in those jurisdictions and tell them I was an anonymous concerned citizen who had seen suspicious activity near those addresses. It wasn't enough, but it was all I had. I walked to my small office to retrieve my manifest. It was in my desk drawer, locked tight. I opened the drawer, pulled out the manifest, and spread it out on my desk. That's when I saw it. Resting on top of my own handwritten list of addresses was a small, perfectly square, white envelope. It was the kind you'd buy at a specialty stationery store, thick, pristine, and sealed with a bead of deep crimson wax. stamped with a simple, decorative evergreen tree. I stared at it. It hadn't been there when I locked the drawer 15 hours earlier. My heart hammered in my chest. I remembered the 2-second door opening. The flash of something white. He wasn't just collecting addresses. He was leaving something too. I picked up the envelope with a shaking hand. It was addressed to me, in precise, unnervingly elegant cursive. To the supervisor. There was no return address. My mind raced. He had put it in my desk drawer, which meant he had access to my keys, which meant he had been in my office. He hadn't just used the warehouse. He had invaded my personal space. And he did it while I was on the floor, watching him. I broke the wax seal. The envelope opened easily. Inside, there was a single, folded sheet of cardstock. I pulled it out. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a confession. It was a small, personalized Christmas card. Inside, in the same elegant script, were 2 lines. Merry Christmas, and a very safe New Year at your house. My street address. My breath hitched. I dropped the card. The psychological horror of it was complete. Cal hadn't just been finding new targets. He had been profiling me. He knew my schedule. He knew I was a supervisor. And through the company files or the sheer act of watching me, he had found my home address. And the gift he gave me wasn't an ornament from my past, but a promise for my future. That he knew exactly where I lived. He had delivered his own silent gift directly to me. I never heard from Cal again. He was gone. The shipping company never found anything suspicious. Mr. Davies concluded that the door alarm was faulty and the torn labels were due to poor handling. But for me, the terror continues. Every Christmas, when the mail is heavy and the deliveries pile up, I look at every passing van, every delivery driver, and every stranger on my street. Because I know that someone used the system I supervise to collect names and addresses. And I know that somewhere, Cal has my address, and he still hasn't decided what kind of gift he wants to deliver to my home. I used to love winters. The silence, the clean white of fresh snow, the way the air felt sharper and quieter at the same time. But that was before the cabin, before the snowshoe tracks, before the gift left in our fireplace, before I learned that silence could be a living thing, watching, waiting, listening. 4 years ago, I was 26, burnt out from freelance work, the city noise, and the chaotic holiday rush. My boyfriend at the time, Jason, thought I was being dramatic when I said I wanted a true escape for the week between Christmas and New Year's. He was a skeptic in all things: ghosts, intuition, bad feelings. To him, everything had a logical explanation. And to be fair, that mindset kept him calm in situations where I spiraled easily. We rented a cabin that promised seclusion. The photos showed a rustic A-frame deep in the mountains of northern Vermont, surrounded by pines so tall and dense they looked like black cliffs at night. It was farther from civilization than anything either of us had ever rented. 10 miles down a narrow, unplowed logging road with no cell signal and no nearby neighbors. The owner, a retired man named Harold, lived several miles away and only checked the property every couple of days to restock firewood. Perfect, I told Jason when we booked it. Claustrophobic, he muttered under his breath. But he went along with it anyway. We arrived 2 days after Christmas. Snow fell the entire drive up, and by the time we reached the narrow forest track that passed for a road, the trees leaned inward, like they were arching over a grave. Jason drove slowly, gripping the wheel with both hands as the SUV fought the incline and the ice. When we finally reached the cabin, a steep roof structure half buried in snow, with a wraparound porch and floor-to-ceiling windows facing the forest, it really did feel like we'd stepped outside the world. Inside was warm, clean, simple. A stone fireplace, wooden rafters, a loft bedroom, and a small kitchen that smelled faintly of cedar. The silence outside was absolute, almost heavy. No traffic, no neighbors, no lights beyond our own. For the first 2 days, it was magical. We cooked simple meals, read by the fire, played board games, and hiked short trails near the cabin. There was no service, no notifications, nothing to pull us out of the moment. I remember thinking I could live like this forever. The third night changed everything. We had just finished eating when the outside floodlights flickered once, dimmed, and went completely black. The interior lights stayed on, but the darkness outside was sudden and total, swallowing the porch, the trees, the snow. Jason sighed. Probably the generator. I'll check it. Take the big flashlight, I said, and don't go far. He kissed my forehead, his way of teasing me for worrying, and pulled on his coat. Through the window, I watched the beam of his flashlight cut across the falling snow as he walked toward the generator shed about 50 yards behind the cabin. I expected him back in a few minutes. He took 15. When he finally stepped back inside, he was breathing harder than he should have been. Snow dusted his shoulders, and his face looked pale in the lamplight. "The generator's fine," he said quietly. "Then why did the lights go out?" "They didn't. Not really." He took a moment before adding, "Someone unscrewed them." I stared at him. "What do you mean, someone?" "The floodlights. The big outdoor ones mounted high up. They weren't burned out or broken, they were unscrewed. All 3 of them. Jason, they're 10 feet high." "I know. Did you see footprints?" "No. Snow covered everything." His jaw tightened. "But the bulbs didn't fall out. They were carefully loosened. As in, someone reached up somehow and turned them by hand." We checked outside the next morning. A fresh layer of snow had fallen, erasing all tracks except the ones Jason left the night before. The forest looked untouched, perfect, undisturbed. But there was one thing we noticed: a small, fogged circle on the tiny window of the generator shed. The kind of mark left by someone pressing their face or something else close to the glass. I told myself it could have been either of us. Condensation, weather, anything. But deep down, that explanation didn't settle. That night, the sounds began. We had gone to bed early. The fire downstairs reduced to a soft glow of embers. The wind outside made the cabin creak occasionally, but nothing unusual. Sometime around 2 a.m., a sound woke me soft, repetitive. It was coming from below us, in the living room. Slow, deliberate, like someone dribbling a heavy ball on wooden floorboards. I shook Jason awake. "Do you hear that?" He groaned. "It's the house settling." "No, listen. It's rhythmic." He sat up reluctantly. For a long moment, the cabin was quiet. Then, Jason threw off the covers. "Fine, I'll check." He grabbed the fireplace poker from beside the bed and the flashlight. I watched him descend the stairs, each step creaking loudly. At the bottom, he paused. The living room was dark except for the faint orange glow from the dying fire. "See?" he called softly. "Nothing." He swept the flashlight across the floor. The sound had stopped. Everything looked normal: the couch, the small dining table, the stacked firewood. Then Jason took his first step back up the stairs. The scraping started, a violent metallic drag across the wooden floor, long and loud, the sound of something heavy being pulled from one end of the room to the other. Jason spun around so fast he almost slipped. The metal firewood carrier, the heavy rectangular one we'd left by the fireplace, was now sitting in the middle of the living room, as though it had been shoved or dragged several feet. Jason didn't speak, didn't move. The beam of his flashlight trembled across the metal frame. He took 3 steps backward up the stairs. Then he ran. He slammed the loft door behind him and latched it, his breath coming in harsh, terrified bursts. "That wasn't the house settling," I whispered. Jason swallowed hard. "No, it wasn't." We spent the rest of the night awake, listening to the silence press against the cabin like something living. When morning light finally filtered through the windows, we decided to leave. But what we found outside made the decision obvious. Leading from the deep woods to the generator shed was a line of massive snowshoe tracks, the old wooden kind, long and oval, used for crossing deep snow silently. They were crisp, fresh, perfectly preserved. Someone had come through the forest. Not down the road. Not from a trail. From the trees. From the dark. The tracks led straight to the shed, then angled toward the cabin, before vanishing abruptly into the pines. Jason stared at them for a long time, his breath fogging in the cold air. "We're not alone," he whispered. I didn't tell him the truth I already felt in my bones. We hadn't been alone since the night the lights were unscrewed. Jason stared at the snowshoe prints, like they were a message carved into stone. Something ancient, deliberate, and meant for us alone. I could see his breath shaking in the cold air, but he tried to hide it behind a thin layer of rationality. "Maybe it's Harold," he muttered. "Harold uses a snowmobile," I whispered. "And these prints came from the woods, not the road." He didn't argue. He didn't have to. We both knew the truth. Someone else was out there, Someone who had come close enough to unscrew our floodlights, peer into the shed, and maybe even watch us through the massive windows of the cabin while we slept. We packed in silence. The plan was simple: get to the SUV, start it, and drive as far as we could. The logging road was dangerous, but being trapped here surrounded by miles of forest, no signal, and a stranger who moved silently through deep snow was infinitely worse. Jason grabbed the keys. "On three," he whispered. "1, 2, go." We sprinted across the porch, boots crunching loudly in the snow. The SUV sat about 30 feet from the front door, half buried in white, but still accessible. Jason yanked open the driver's side door and jumped in. I threw our bags into the back and slid into the passenger seat. Come on," Jason muttered, turning the key. The engine sputtered, coughed. "Deed." He tried again, slamming the heel of his hand into the steering wheel. "Nothing. I thought you checked." "I did," he snapped. "The battery wasn't dead last night." Something... He stopped. Slowly, Jason leaned forward until his forehead nearly touched the windshield. Then he pointed to the hood. A thin, perfect line of disturbed snow led from the SUV's engine, across the snowy ground, and straight into the forest. It was the imprint of a glove dragging through the snow. Someone had opened our hood in the night. Someone had reached in. Someone had done something to the engine. Jason's voice dropped to a whisper. He was at the car, while we were asleep. A surge of panic hit me so hard I nearly threw up. "We have to go back inside." We scrambled out of the SUV, nearly falling as we sprinted back to the cabin. Jason slammed the door shut, locked it twice, and dragged the heavy dresser in front of it. We stood there, chests heaving, staring at each other. "We're trapped," I whispered. "No," Jason started pacing. "We can fix the engine. We just need light, tools, time. And what if he comes back?" Jason didn't answer. He didn't need to. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, the silence thicker, as if the woods themselves were leaning closer. We decided to move together, never alone. While Jason checked for tools downstairs, I searched the loft for anything useful. A flare, a whistle, a rope, anything. I didn't find any of that, but I found something else. Something that wasn't there the night before. The cold ashes in the fireplace had been disturbed, and sitting neatly in the center, as if placed there with care, was a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. My heart stopped. "Jason," I whispered, "come here." He climbed the stairs quickly, then froze when he saw the package. Neither of us touched it. Neither of us moved. We just stared. The package was small, no bigger than a deck of cards, but unmistakably deliberate, personal, intimate. The kind of thing someone leaves when they have been close enough to stand beside you while you slept. Jason swallowed hard. He was in here. The realization hit us both like a physical blow. The intruder didn't just roam the woods. He didn't just unscrew the lights. He didn't just tamper with the generator or the SUV. He had been inside the cabin, close enough to leave us a gift, close enough to watch us sleep, close enough to choose the perfect place to leave his message. The heart of the cabin, the place we gathered, warmed ourselves, felt safe. Jason picked up the package with trembling hands. "I'm opening it." "No, it might tell us what he wants," he whispered. He slid a finger under the twine and pulled. The paper opened with a soft, tearing sound that seemed too loud in the silence. Inside was a pristine metal object, cold, heavy, and unmistakable. Bolt cutters. Large ones, meant for thick chains, or for locks. Jason lifted a small card taped to the inside of the paper. The handwriting was uneven, jagged, almost childlike. "You changed your locks. Good. Use these when the snow gets deeper. The door will need to open again." Jason dropped the bolt cutters like they were burning hot metal. They clanged loudly against the stone hearth. "This is a threat," I whispered. "No," Jason said, voice hollow. "It's worse than a threat." What do you mean?" "He didn't give us these to break in," Jason said. "He gave us these because he intends to lock something, or someone, in." The cabin suddenly felt suffocating. We decided the shed was our only chance. It might have tools, fuel, something to help us restart the car or force our way down the road. We bundled up, armed ourselves with a heavy flashlight and the fireplace poker, and stepped onto the porch. The forest was still, too still. We walked quickly toward the shed, boots sinking into the deepening snow. The air felt colder, heavier. Halfway there, Jason stopped. The shed door was open. Wide open. Inside was total darkness. "Stay behind me," he whispered. We moved slowly, cautiously. Each step sounded louder than it should have. The trees felt closer. The shadows thicker. Jason reached the doorway first, lifted the flashlight, and pointed it inside. Then he froze. The beam illuminated the interior of the shed, and everything inside was neatly arranged: tools on hooks, fuel cans stacked, generator humming quietly. Except for one thing. In the center of the floor, carved into the frost-covered boards, was a single, deep footprint. A snowshoe print. But this one wasn't facing inward. It was facing outward. Toward the cabin. Toward us. "That means," I whispered. Jason finished the sentence for me, his voice barely audible. He was inside while we were out here. Suddenly the woods came alive with the sharp, dry crack of a branch snapping somewhere deep between the trees. Not close, but not far either. Jason grabbed my hand. "We have to go," he said. "Now." We ran back to the cabin, back to the failing illusion of safety, slamming the door behind us. Snow fell heavier now, pounding the roof like thousands of tiny fists. We didn't sleep that night. We sat in the loft, backs against the wall, bolt cutters on the floor, listening to the snow and the darkness shift outside. At one point, just before dawn, I heard it. A soft thump on the porch. Then another. Then the faint crunch of snowshoe frames moving slowly, methodically, past the cabin window. Jason reached for my hand. Neither of us breathed. The steps circled the cabin once. Then silence. When daylight finally returned, Jason approached the window. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally turned to me, he looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight. "He left something," Jason whispered. "What?" Jason closed his eyes. "Another gift. We never opened it. We left that cabin as soon as Harold arrived on his snowmobile later that morning. We never went back. We never asked what was inside the second package, because we both understood the truth. The man in the snowshoes didn't want us dead. He wanted us scared. He wanted us watched.